So we're continuing in Masechus Berachos, Daf Nun Amud Aleph, and we are picking up 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from before it gets right. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. If a person says, literally again, this is the verbiage of the Zimun, let us bench or let us bless from who we have eaten from. Harei tam chacham. That's tam chacham. The misha achanu mishalo. But if you say let's bless the one of whose food we have eaten, ultimately again this is such an individual harei zebor. So ultimately again, the idea over here is the Berachos shachal mishalo indicates that there's only one HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The me from the one sounds like again there are others. But if you're saying the Pesach Haggadah, we make the bracha in the bracha Asher Ga'alanu. We thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lemi for the one who did for our forefathers. Is he using the lashon of Lemi? So ultimately, I'm sorry, I should say differently. So it's different because there, since we're talking about the context of miracles, it's obvious who is the one who performs miracles. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Beautiful. Rabbi Yochanan says as follows: Baruch shachal mishalo harei tam chacham. The person says, Baruch, blessed is the one from whose food we have eaten. That's tam chacham. Ala mazon sha'achalnu. But if you just say again, ultimately again, for the food we have eaten without a reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, harei zebar, such a person is ignorant. Amar Rav Huna Rabbi Yeshua, Amar Ela b'shlosha. But the truth is, these halachas are only stated when you're having 3 people eating together. Telek Hashem Shamayim, because when there's 3, remember just the mezumin, there's no name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ba'asara, but if you're benching with a minyan di'ik Hashem Shamayim, where you're using the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mucha milsa, then ultimately again, since you're saying Elokeinu when benching with a minyan, then obviously you are including HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your bracha. So the Gemara says, the Kiddusnan, as we learned, Inyan Shum Mevarich Kach Onin Acharov Baruch Hashem Elokei Yisrael Elokei Tzivakos Yoshev Hakruvim Al Hamazon Sha'achalnu. So the point over here, they're making over here, is that in this formulation, there is no explicit statement that the food belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yet, because we mentioned Elokeinu, then it's clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the subject, or I should say is the recipient of our praise. Beautiful. So remember again, we noted this contradiction in the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah said, whether you're benching with 10 people or 10,000 people, the verbiage is the same. The problem is then the Mishnah went on to discuss the differences in the wording depending on how large of a group you're davening with. So the Gemara says, Hagufa Kasha, Amrit, Echad Asar ve'Echad Asar Ribo, Alma Ki Adadininu, V'Hadar Katani B'Meya Omer Be'Alef Omer B'Ribo Omer. So the Mishnah is contradictory. At first, the Mishnah says it doesn't matter how many people are in your group, whether you have 10 or 10,000, the formulation, the verbiage for Berachos Hamazon is the same. But then the Mishnah goes on to say, no, if you're benching with 3 people, it looks like this, 10 people, it looks like this, 100 people, it looks like this, 1,000 people, it looks like this, which indicates that as you change numbers, amounts of people, the verbiage of benching also changes. Amar Rabbi Yosef Lokashya, Ha Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Ha Rabbi Akiva. 2 different opinions as recorded in the Mishnah. This 9, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Lefi Rov HaKal He Mevarchim, Shinem Rabbi Makelos, Baruch Es Hashem, or Baruch Elokim, Amar Rabbi Akiva, so this is a fundamental machlokes in Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili is of the opinion that the verbiage of benching will change depending on the size of the group. The larger the group, the different the verbiage is going to be. Rabbi Akiva says, just like in shul, when we say Baruch Hu, whether you're davening with a minyan of 10 people or 1,000 people, it's the same verbiage for davening. So too we maintain the same verbiage for benching as well. So now the Gemara goes on a little bit of a side point, because Rabbi Yossi Aglili quoted this pasuk, "B'makelos Baruch Hu Elokim." So literally again in the large groups you bless HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili uses that pasuk as a proof to say the larger the group, the difference in the bracha. The Gemara now asks for Rabbi Akiva. What does Rabbi Akiva do with that very same pasuk? It's actually very beautiful. Rameir used to say as follows. So this is so beautiful. How do we know that when Klal Yisrael crossed the Yam Suf, that even the babies in utero, even the babies in their mother's stomach, went ahead and took part in the Shira. Shenabra makelos Baruchu Elokim Hashem Mimkar Yisrael. Because the rest of the pasuk reads that literally in the great groups, in the large groups, we bless Hashem from the source of Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara is understanding over here that the Makar, the source, is a reference to babies in utero. That even children in utero participated in the Shira. V'idach. So where does Rabbi Yossi Halili get this idea? He learns it out ultimately again, Mimkar. So in other words, what Rabbi Yossi Halili essentially does is he kind of splits the pasuk in two. In other words, from the phrase or from the word b'makelos baruch Hashem, and large groups will bless Hashem, that Rabbi Yossi Halili teaches us uses to teach us that halacha l'maisa, depending on the size of the group, will ultimately again determine the nature of the benching. And then the concept of Mimkar Yisrael, or Mimkar, ultimately he learns out from the Makar, from the source, learns to teach us that even children in utero recited Shira at Yam Suf. Beautiful. Amar Rav Yossi, Amar Rava, Halach Rabbi Akiva. So Rav said the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva, namely again that the verbiage from Mezumin is the same no matter what the size of the group. Ravina Racham Bar Buzi, Iklo Lebe Reish Galusa. So Ravina Racham Bar Buzi went to the house of Reish Galusa, Kam Rav Cham Bekam Hadar Abai Meya. So Rabbi Chama got up, and before they benched, he wanted to get together a group of 100 to be able to use the 100-person formulation for Berachos Hamazon. Amrle Ravina, Lo Tzrichas. Ravina said you don't have to. Halacha Rabbi Akiva. You don't have to go ahead and do that because after all, the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva, and that the verbiage for the Mezumin remains the same. We know this is how we paskin. Of course, there are different forms of zimun. So obviously, we know between 3 without Shem Hashem, 10 with Shem Hashem. For a brist is a different kind of Mezumin. For Berachos is a different kind of Mezumin. But aside from that, in general circumstances, we use the same verbiage, whether it's a large group or a small group. Essentially, once you reach the threshold of 10, so you're benching with the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then the lashon of the mezuman is pretty much fixed. Amarava, ki achlina rifta bereish kalusa, bevarchinan shlosha. This is interesting. When we used to have a meal in the house of Reish Kalusa, so ultimately, again, it's actually interesting, they would make groups of 3. They make groups of 3. So in other words, that what would happen is, this is large. This happens at chasanas a lot, right? They had a large meal and different groups finish eating at different times. So they would bench, in groups of 3. But why 3? Why not break into groups of 10? Because this way, if it's 10, at least you can go out and say the name of Hashem. To which Shama Reish Galusa the Ikbid, the Reish Galusa would hear this and he'd get upset because after all, again, people are leaving the meal early. That's not nice. So why not go ahead and then wait for the Reish Galusa? In other words, if they just be Yotze with the benching of the Reish Galusa. In other words, wait until the Reish Galusa is ready to bench, and then haloch lamaisa, go ahead and finish with the Reish Galusa, bench the Reish Galusa. I did the avshu kulin alma lo shama. This is very interesting because haloch lamaisa, what are we concerned about? It was very loud. So because it was very loud, they wouldn't be able to hear. All right. Amar Rabba Tosfa, Hani Shlosha Dikarchi Rifta Bahadi Adadi. If 3 people ate bread together, Vikadim Chamina Ubarach Ledaite Inun Nafkin Bizimun Didei. So this is interesting. So Allah Chames is fascinating. So right, you have 3 people who ate together, and what happens? One of them went ahead and benched without the mezumin. Now what happens? Now the other 2 guys obviously want to come and make their mezumin. So the Gemara says that the other 2 could still include the 3rd in their mezumin, thereby creating the 3. So right, so even though one of them already benched, but halach l'maisa, the 2 that didn't bench can include the 3rd as part of their mezumin. Iu lo nafik bezimun didahu. So this is actually very interesting. So obviously, the chiddush over here is that the guy who benched could still be included in with the other 2 to make a mezumin, since they had all initially eaten together. But of course, what ends up happening in that situation is that halacha l'maisa, so the guys who are benching now, so they go ahead and they get mezumin, right? They get the mitzvah mezumin. The guy who benched already, obviously, you can't get retroactive mezumin. Okay? Rabbi Shmuel says, right? So again, Rabbi Shmuel holds, right? Rabbi Shmuel says, he said in the shul, ultimately again, that the Chazan says, Baruch Hu Hashem, rather than just, right? So good. So the Gemara, right, those lashon of the Mishnah. Good. So Rafram Bar Papa ikla lebei knishta da Abe Givar. So Rafram Bar Papa went to the shul of Abe Givar. Kam kara b'sifra. He got up and he read from the Torah. V'amr Baruch Hu as Hashem v'ishtik v'lo Amar hamavorach. And ultimately, again, otherwise, I'm sorry. So let me go back for a second. Rabbi Shmuel said that in shul, the Chazan says Baruch Hu es Hashem hamavorach, and not just Baruch Hu es Hashem. Fine. Now the Gemara tells the story. Rafram Bar Papa went to the shul in Abe Givar. He got up, he got an aliyah, and he said Baruch Hu es Hashem, but he v'ishtik v'lo amar hamavorach, but he didn't say hamavorach. Av shukuli alma. So everybody responded Baruch Hu es Hashem hamavorach. They responded Amar Rava b'hadei plukta l'hamalach. So Rava says to Rafram Bar Papa, what are you getting involved in this with machlokes? Va'od, in other words, why are you inserting yourself into a machlokes and taking a side over here? Well, there seems to be the majority opinions like Rabbi Shmuel. Va'od hanog almak Rabbi Shmuel. And furthermore, again, everyone agrees with Rabbi Shmuel anyway, which again, a little anticlimactic for us because we know this. Again, in shul, we don't just say Baruch Hu es Hashem, but rather we say Baruch Hu es Hashem Hamevorach. Okay, I will say not to stop over here for today. We are going to pick up with the Mishnah tomorrow. Shkoyach, everyone.